Pleasure to be joined now on MASN All Access by Ben Clemens, baseball writer for FanGraphs. Ben, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
So one stat that I have thrown around a lot on MASN All Access on the podcast is expected batting average. And I go to FanGraphs for everything advanced stats and analytics. Can you just give me a quick breakdown of what exactly goes into the calculation for expected batting average?
Yeah, so expected batting average is one of I'd say the most obvious applications of StatCast, which is the new system that MLB gives to everyone, essentially. It's just free data online that looks at exactly what happens to the ball after it's hit when it's pitched. And so expected batting average is pretty simple. It takes the speed the ball's hit at and the angle the ball's hit at. So this is just like up or down. Like, is it a line drive? Is it a pop-up? Is it a ground ball? And it looks at all the balls that are similar to that over some training period, but essentially the last year or so. And it says, how likely is that to become a hit? And there's actually a cool feature. If it's a grounder, they add in the speed of the base runner. So they make an adjustment. You got, Adley Rutschman. I mean, he's slow, even though he's young, versus Cedric Mullins. The same ground ball is a very different chance of becoming a hit, right? If they hit it to a third baseman and the third baseman's either making a do or die play or can double clutch and still get him safely, it should be different. And so expected batting average just looks at those. It takes those three and it says, on average, over the course of, a ton of batted balls and a ton of situations, how often do these become hits?
That's a stat that we've used a lot when talking about players like Trey Mancini early on in the season and somebody like Ryan Mountcastle right now. How would you personally evaluate a player that has a lower actual batting average but a higher expected batting average?
So it kind of depends on how they get to it. So one thing that expected batting average doesn't consider is where you're hitting the ball. So if you're pulling everything, it's not going to take that into account. It thinks a pulled grounder is the same as an opposite field grounder. And it also treats every hit the same. Of course, like it's batting average, so it comes with all of the things that batting average comes with. So when you've got a guy like Mancini, who pulls a lot of his grounders, and just generally speaking, he's like not the fastest, which is captured in there, but like he's got a lot of reasons that it's easier to shift against him. And so I think that makes it tougher for him to run a kind of like consistently high batting average relative to expected batting average. Same with slugging relative to expected slugging. When he's getting the ball in the air, then the results are kind of, they are what they are. And over time, his expected slugging should track his slugging quite well. But when we're looking at ground balls, if you're easy to shift against, it helps a little bit with him that he's right-handed and it's harder to shift against righties. But generally speaking, if you're a power hitter, you're probably pulling a ton of your ground balls. That's just how it works. You're trying to get to that A swing as often as possible. That's why you're a power hitter. And that leads to a lot of pulled grounders. If it's easier to position the defense against you, you'll underperform your expected batting average pretty consistently.
So is that a situation where you would classify a player as getting unlucky, or do you think that classification is a little bit too simplistic?
Yeah, I'd say that's too simplistic. There's just multiple ways to look at it. If you're looking at him getting unlucky on his balls in the air, that's a thing over the long haul. You don't actually shift those effectively. Teams play 4 outfielders and works a little bit. Now in Camden, you can get a little bit unlucky in left field. I assume that's particularly a problem for Mancini this year. I haven't really dug in, but I bet it is. But expected batting average, you can underperform that for a while just because of the distribution of your batted balls. And underperform, is it really underperforming if you consistently post a lower number than you quote unquote should? I'm not sure. So I think the expected StatCast stats are pretty interesting, but I don't think they tell the whole story. And if you really want to dig into whether a player is getting unlucky, getting lucky, you just got to do a little more digging, basically.
So for a player like Ryan Mountcastle, for example, who right now has a pretty low batting average, but a very good expected batting average, for the rest of the season, is that actual batting average a number that we should expect to climb closer to that expected batting average?
Yeah, I'd say so. I think Mountcastle is a great example. I mean, I don't think he'll reach it, but he's underperforming it, fairly heavily. And if you look at all of his peripheral stats, they all line up and tell me this guy's hitting the ball really hard. And that's why I say you need to look at more things. It's kind of complex, but Mountcastle puts the barrel of the bat on the ball. And Statcast has this stat called barrels, which is when you hit it hard and in the air. And he does it more than almost anyone else in baseball. He's in the 90th percentile. And it's hard to do that and keep having a so-so batting line. And he also hits the ball really hard. And when he hits the ball hard, he hits it in the air a lot. He has a high hard hit rate. He has a high average exit velocity and maximum exit velocity. So he's a case where you can look at his numbers and say, yeah, could he underperform? Could he continue to underperform the expected statistics? Yeah, absolutely. Like there are things about his game that make you think he might, but he does everything so well when he actually hits the ball that I don't think it's reasonable to think he's going to keep underperforming by as much as he has. It's not a case where he has, some line drive that he's kind of getting unlucky on. But they're not hit that hard, and they'll find gloves eventually one way or another. He's hitting the ball really hard, and that works in the long run.
So outside of expected batting average, are there any other stats in particular that you like to look at when evaluating a hitter?
Yeah, I would say that if you made me pick 3 statistics to evaluate a hitter, I would look at their barrel percentage. That's what I was talking about, how often they hit the ball hard and in the air. I would look at their swing and miss percentage or whiff rate. And that's just, when they swing, how often do they miss? And I'd look at their walk rate. And I think those are nice because when you put them together, they tell you a lot about what a hitter's doing. If you are not swinging and missing very often and walking a lot, well, I care a little bit less if you're hitting the ball hard and in the air because you're just making a lot of contact. Some of those will find holes and you're walking. If you're hitting the ball really hard, I can accept more strikeouts. But if you're not hitting the ball hard and striking out a lot, well, we got a problem here. And so I think if you look at those 3 statistics together, either just strikeout and walk rate and barrel percentage or something fancier like whiff rate, how often you swing and miss, those are the 3 key parts, I think, of being a hitter is when you hit the ball, hitting it hard, not missing too often, and taking your walks. And so if you look at those 3, you can get a pretty good idea of what someone's doing generally.
Now, outside of the hitters, the Orioles have seen some incredible bounce-back seasons from Jorge López and Keegan Akin, 2 guys who struggled as starting pitchers last year and have now found a home in the bullpen. I want to start with López. Outside of the obvious 100-mile-an-hour sinker that helps him a lot, what jumps out to you about him and how he's been able to make this improvement?
Yeah, the thing that jumps out most to me about Jorge López is his curveball. And it's not even his 100-mile-an-hour sinker, which is funny because it's a really good pitch. But his curveball it's a really interesting case study in what pitchers are trying to do in baseball these days. If you look at Jorge López's past years of curveballs, they've been so-so. And he hasn't done a lot to change the shape of it. It's a pretty big curveball. It's got 2-plane break. It breaks down. It breaks sideways. Looks kind of like a worse version of an Adam Wainwright curveball, that's a good thing, to be clear. I would take that. But what he's done this year is he's just thrown it 3 miles an hour harder. And does that sound important as a curveball? I'm not sure. I don't know what people think when I tell you, oh, this pitcher's throwing his curveball harder. But as it turns out, that's really good. You think of velocity with fastballs, but faster breaking balls are really good. They may even be better than faster fastballs. And he throws his curveball so fast that it's almost hard for it to be bad. It gets in on the hitter before they have time to react. It still breaks a ton. And in fact, I keep praising Statcast, but that's just because they give us so much data. They measure your break relative to other pitches of the same type at the same speed. And López's curveball is breaking less in both directions than it did last year. But relative to a curveball thrown at 84 miles an hour now, it moves more because it moves almost as much as it used to, and it gets in on the hitter faster. And that's just been a lethal combination. I think his curveball might be his best pitch this year. And that's just crazy to say for a guy who throws a 100-mile-an-hour sinker that no one can hit. But both of those pitches, by going into the bullpen, by just pulling back and throwing them as hard as he can, he's made them elite pitches. And I think he's real. I just think he's a very good reliever right now.
So for Jorge López, it seems like it's been a stuff improvement. Is that the same case for Keegan Akin?
Keegan is kind of both. He's not a sinker baller, obviously, and these types of pitchers like Akin that throw like a fast but not overpoweringly fast four-seam fastball, it's really important to have movement on that pitch. And he has that. That pitch just doesn't fall that much. I mean, if you watch him pitch, you can tell that hitters are consistently under his fastball. And why is that? It's because it doesn't drop as much as you'd expect. And I think that really an absolute ton of that is the fact that he's just able to throw it more consistently with a high spin rate, and he's spinning it out of his hand really well. I don't know if that's a switch to the bullpen has made him better at that, but he's doing it a lot better. One way you can think about it, the ball is dropping an inch less on its way to home plate than it used to. And an inch is a lot. Like that's half a bat, right? And if you were kind of giving up fly balls before, and now the ball's staying over that, it's missing. And he's kind of a guy where that really mattered. His secondary stuff, I don't think, is quite good enough to make it all work on its own. And his slider really got beat up last year, and his changeup is like, it's all right, but it's not my favorite changeup in baseball. So when you have something like that, where your secondaries are probably not going to like be enough, you really need to be able to put hitters away with your fastball. And he's kind of a case where the switch from not being able to do that to being able to do that is just, it's everything. If you look at his numbers, every single rate is better this year. It's not like, oh, he started striking a few guys out. No, they're not hitting the ball as hard. He's walking fewer. He's striking out more. He's just doing everything better. And I think a lot of that is that his pitch mix his fastball couldn't do enough to offset the secondaries before. And the change to the bullpen, it looks to me like he's just more consistent as well. And maybe that's a side effect of getting to come in like situations that are predictable for him, where he can just go max effort and know that he's done. But he looks just really consistent, and that had kind of been his issue before to me.
A lot of encouraging improvements from the Orioles bullpen. Make sure you're checking out everything Ben Clemens has on FanGraphs. Ben, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on again, Brendan.